Welcome to the place where we learn about and learn from the leaders in our field who are powering human creativity. I am Aaron Dworkin, and this is Arts Engines. Thanks again for joining me here on Arts Engines. Today's guest is Randy Cohen, who serves as Vice President of Research at Americans for the Arts. Randy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's so good to be here.
Well, I am so excited to talk to you. And I thought for our audience, before we kind of get into it, I'd love to just get into, economic impact and all of this impact that the arts has on communities. But before that, of course, everyone in our audience knows Americans for the Arts. But what does a VP of Research at Americans for the Arts do? If you could kind of, just share what's the breadth, what falls within your purview, what's the typical day in your life?
The simplest way to think about it is we get people the information tools they need to make the case for the arts. We do big national research studies. We partner with organizations who are they're leading big national research studies and also just gather all the incredible work that's out there. We're by no means the only ones doing it. And so, but really, we take everything and then how do you take a complex research study and then turned it into applied tools and just help folks, the practitioners, use it to help demonstrate their impact, to make the case for the arts. And so Americans for the Arts, we're a communications organization. I mean, that's advocacy, right? So
Absolutely. And so it's so funny, right? Because the I can't count the number of times, right? I've had to in my various roles and capacities. I'm like, okay, I've got to make this argument to a funder, to a public entity, whatever it might be. And then I, see this big study and it's 50 pages long. I read, I'm like, oh my gosh. Okay. How do I translate this, weekend reading into something that I can share with someone who's only given me 10 minutes of their time?
mhm.
And so it seems that summarizing, that focus that you're able to do is so important in translating what is volumes of data into actual usable information. And so maybe kind of on that front, kind of economic impact. We all hear about it. We all have to talk about it. We all have to say, oh, okay, we're not just doing this work and, this person or this community is transformed by our music, by our theater, by our dance, whatever it might be. But also, here's what's happening economically. Could you just kind of share a little about kind of how you think about that in terms of how important is measuring the economic impact of the arts and ballpark kind of what are some of those takeaways or summaries we should be sharing about the economic impact of the arts?
Absolutely. I'll say this in terms of advocacy tools. If I were some extraterrestrial for outer space, here to advocate for the arts, Aaron, take me to your leader. Oh, yeah, and give me one advocacy point. I'd probably make it an economic impact talking point because you talk to most decision makers and you ask them what their three priorities are: jobs, jobs, and jobs. That's just what our elected leaders, keep a very close lens on. That said, we should never forget the part of that you talked about to begin this question, which is the arts inspire us, they beautify our communities, they create the places we want to live and work, they transform our lives. And that is something we must always include as part of our advocacy. But the fact is, most people stipulate, yeah, good, okay, I get those cultural benefits, but what else? And Arts and Economic Prosperity 6, which we released in the fall of 2023, shows that just the nonprofit arts sector alone is a 151.7 billion with a B dollar industry. And that's numbers made up of two buckets of money. First, spending by the organizations. It doesn't matter if you're a small organization in a small rural community, a huge institution in an urban city. The fact is, Our organizations, we're businesses. We employ people locally. We purchase goods and services from other businesses. We're members of the Chamber of Commerce. We drive tourism. Arts organizations are good business citizens. And we also have this additional benefit, which is when people attend an arts event, they usually make a whole experience out of it, right? Dinner and a show and parking and babysitting. Nationally, the typical attendee to an arts event spends $38.46 per person per event, not including the cost of admission. I'll give you another, just two numbers real quick. That economic activity supports 2.6 million jobs in this country. And again, we're just talking about the nonprofit sector. We're not including, Hollywood motion pictures, university drama departments, architecture firms, all which are hugely important, but just not part of this study. And we focus on that because that's where those public dollars are typically going.
I love that too. And because a lot of times I've heard, people share, oh, and here is the economic impact. And then people often say, yeah, but you're including Hollywood and you're including all of these other big for-profit industries. So I love that you're just focusing on the
Mhm.
nonprofit and the organizations that require public support from either individuals and or from public forces, sources of funding, NEA, et cetera, so on and
Mhm.
so forth. So I think that's so important in that economic impact, and I think our ability to capture that. I can only assume for those in our audience who want to be able to like, okay, this was great. Those were a couple numbers that just went by. Where can we go? Best place, I assume, is somewhere on AFTA's site for anyone in our
Yeah. I mean, what do I do with those all those billions of dollars? On our website, if you go to aep6.americansforthearts.org, you'll find the Arts and Economic Prosperity Calculator. And if all you need is your organizational expenditures and attendance data, if you've got it, and then you pick a similarly populated population category, hit calculate, and an estimate of your organization's economic impact will pop up. So then when you're writing your proposals about, how we're transforming a community and, touching the lives of young people, and here's the impact on jobs and government revenue. And a little something interesting about arts jobs, our jobs are necessarily local jobs. These are not the kind of jobs that are going to be offshored. Bottom line, arts and culture, it's not just food for the soul, but it's putting food on the table in our communities.
I love that. And I especially love that tool that you shared. Practical, absolute
Hmm.
applicable mechanism that all of us can use so that we can be more successful with our own organizations. And I think it's also so important because sometimes we can just get so, caught up because we're on the front line. We're seeing that impact of the arts firsthand. And so we're like, this is why. But we have to realize that for some of the audiences to whom we need to make the case for, especially financial resources, we've got to be able to step back and go, yes, but they need to hear this economic information.
Hmm.
It's so
Yeah.
important for their decision making.
It's just adding all that value. And I'll just say one other thing. I've got a golden rule for advocacy at Americans for the Arts: no numbers without a story, no stories without a number. We're the arts. We've got all kinds of stories. It might be as an arts attendee, how we spent $38.46 at an arts event, or as an organization, how we employ not just, musicians and actors, but electricians and plumbers and accountants and auditors and security staff. And then pair that story with a number, because that's how you make the most memorable advocacy visits ever. We need both.
I love that. And I especially love stories and numbers and bringing those together. It's so key. So, one other thing I was wondering if you could just kind of talk about all, but a lot of people are also talking about the arts and impact on just being and building healthy communities
Mm.
overall, and kind of the arts role in that as communities and community leaders look to make decisions. And just wondering if you could speak to that at all and how AFTA views that, especially.
Absolutely. The arts touch so many aspects of our lives. One of the other things you'll find on the website is 10 reasons to support the arts, and it's a one pager, and you go to it and it's got how the arts touch well-being and mental health and arts and military and education, and you actually click on the header and that'll take you to some more primary source data. So put that in your pocket. That's your advocacy tool. I gotta say, what drives me in this, and I've been in Americans for the Arts for 32 years, and um, I just there's just nothing more important that I think I can be doing with my life because the arts have saved my life. When I was a kid in school, whatever was going on outside the window was the most interesting thing that day, and the arts kept me coming back to school. And of course, now that there's this research that shows when the arts are part of a young person's education, better grades, better test scores, lower dropout rates. Um, about 8 years ago, I had open heart surgery. I had quintuple bypass surgery. And the week before, I'd played 2 soccer games. I thought was a guy who I thought was in good health. And I tell you, nothing will take um, the confidence out of you like a stay in the hospital and your ability and self-efficacy. And I quickly went from a person who thought, man, I'm on a roll to I didn't know if I had what it takes to get to the other side of this. And I got to tell you, there was art in the hospital. And as I was walking those halls with my telemetry device and my chest tubes in hand, it was the art on the wall that pulled me in. And it was the colors that were maybe a feast for tired eyes, but I could feel the healing hand of the artist touch me palpably. And that gave me hope. That made me realize I could get to the other side of this. And um, I'm so grateful for the arts. I always wish I could find that artist to thank him. And so this is my mission. This is my purpose to make sure we've all got the opportunity to connect and make the arts part of our lives.
Well, and Randy, thank you so much for sharing that. And, it was interesting, as you shared that, my first just thing was the way that you shared that. I felt like you brought me there into the hospital momentarily and the way just that you illustrated it. But then also I was thinking, so here's the person who in many ways is leading all of the numbers for the arts in our country, but what you've left us all with is one of the most important stories.
Hmm.
All of those numbers that you experience personally.
Yeah,
Really
yeah,
appreciate
thank you.
that.
And the good news is the research backs up all of that. When the arts are part of our healthcare, shorter hospital stays, fewer doctor visits. Um, but it was a palpable, transformative spiritual change, which I didn't expect. I didn't even know it. I didn't see it coming. And boy, am I grateful.
Absolutely. Well, we're just about out of time, and I usually ask of all my guests, but in some ways I feel like you just answered it. But which is, as a leader, you are also an arts administration leader. So even though these numbers are so powerful and the impact that your work is having is literally, just has a ripple effect across the country, even around the world. But there's got to be tough days. And as an arts administrator, I was wondering if there's any key mechanisms you use as a leader or things you turn to for inspiration, for strength during those toughest of times. Obviously, clearly, that art in your experience in the hospital was palpable, but just wondering anything else you wanted to share that any of our leaders in the audience would benefit from.
There's the old saying, if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And it's interesting. That's a question I bet that my answer would have changed as the decades go by, right? And I believe every success is a partnership. The world's just too complex, too diverse, too expensive to go alone. We've got to bring everybody along with us. And um, so that's what I'm always seeking to do. Who else can we be doing this? And who's not at the table? Who do we need at the table? And that transparency and vulnerability. Uh, I just think that's the key to making sure that everyone in this country has got the opportunity to participate and engage in the arts, that every child is receiving a quality arts education. And bottom line, right? The arts aren't just nice, they're necessary.
Randy Cohen, you truly are one of the arts engines who is powering human creativity in our world. Thank you for everything that you do, and thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks so much for having me.